I should check this. Yeah, just push the buttons. Check, check, check. Yep. Arrows? Arrows? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Go, yeah.
Righto, just testing. Good. All right, so should we get started, or can you hear me? More profesh, I like it. Right, so good evening everyone. I'm not Jesse, obviously. I'm doing the intros tonight. My voice sounds terrible on this mic. Anyway, whatever. So yeah, welcome. CocoaHeads to, what number are we on now? I think 113, yeah, 113 or 114, I don't know. Just say 113. Little smiley emoji there. So yeah, I'm Ben. That's me. Going to go through upcoming events, the code of conduct, tonight's agenda, and the month it was, then go through who's hiring before the first presentations. The treble is really high on this. Really?
Yeah, you're a bit quiet.
Okay, that's good. That's like a first for me, literally. I've never been told I've been quiet. So yeah, as I said before, I'm Ben. I've been around in iOS since 2008. Got the iPod Touch first gen and started going from there. I'm really eccentric, so I've been told, and I'm at Top Layout Guide on Twitter, so give me a follow if you want to hear more of this complaining. So the upcoming events we have for this and next month is the Hack Night on April 18. Yeah, you can read that. 24th of April for the Drinks Night. They're different now. It used to be Hack Night where you get plastered. Now it's the Drinks Night specifically. Yeah, but what realistically, there's no hacking gets done. Maybe 2 lines of your side project that you've been got since 2013. But and we've got NS breakfast on the 4th of May. And presentation night next month on the 10th of May. And by presentation night, I assume you mean this again next month.
Yeah. Right. I had a pull request up today with all these dates. Someone not double checked it for me. They are the correct dates. And Hack Night's next Wednesday.
Yep, cool. And there's more info on the website URL there. You can't click it, but yeah, commit it to memory. So this is the Hack Night, a photo from, I assume, last month? Yep. So look, pretty good turnout. It's getting there quite well. People seem to like it quite a lot. And it's good that there's no password on this picture this month. Oh, so that's why Luke's in the picture. Righto. Next. So how to find us. We've got the website. We're at Melbourne Coco on Twitter. We've got a Slack. And I think anyone can just jump on the Slack URL and join now. They don't have to ask you on Twitter. Then you send them the invite and they click on. Yep, go to that URL. Yep, go to that URL. We're also on YouTube where we can live stream, and I'm waiting to hear on Slack someone live streaming to get feedback on that because I haven't been able to log in. So, and hassle this guy, Jesse at melbournecocoaheads.com for any questions / thing. I'm going to go through the code of conduct now. I think TUPS wanted to add something to this last month, but we're dedicated to providing an inclusive environment for everyone, regardless of gender, gender identity and expression, age, sexual orientation, disability, physical appearance, body size, race, etc., ethnicity, religion, or lack thereof, or technology choices, quote unquote, Android v Apple. So the Android devs. Or React Native. Don't start. We don't need that, like, in real life.
It's an interesting experiment going, am I ragging on Android right now?
Oh, we can all rag on Facebook later.
Facebook's not a choice.
Well, technically they made React Native, so let's not go there. melbournecocoaheads.com/code of conduct for the full thing if you want to read it all. We basically stole it from, I think, GDG. No, we stole it from AWS and edited it. Yeah, we sort of pieced it together, and people have been stealing ours too, which is really good. And if you experience an issue, and sincerely hope that you do not email that email address, and I think it comes to me, Jesse, and a few others. Like we can hopefully resolve anything that happens, not that there should be anything. Don't do anything, please. Just getting to our sponsors for this year. We're starting with REA, which is our major sponsor. Is anyone from REA in the room? Stand up. I can't see your hands. Right, yay. Just a round of applause for REA. Our silver sponsors are Itty Bitty Apps, Billu, JTribe, Cognizant, and Explore. I had to ask what that rocket logo was, so I'm glad I now know how to say it. And give thanks to YBF Ventures for the venue, which is here, formerly Team Square, now York Butter Factory, or YBF for short. Tonight's agenda, we've just had the pizza, hope it was good, it's almost all gone, which is good. Beer as well. Me doing the intro now, which is right on time. We'll get to who's hiring straight after this. The first talk we have is Alan Zeng, scaling iOS engineering at Xero. We're going to have a break for 15 minutes at 7:15-ish, and we have Jet, or Jean-Etienne, at the end at 7:30, right about introduction to Swift on the server, which is going to be interesting. So, and now we're just going to do a quick, very, very quick, the month it was. Those of you who've been here before will know that my month it was presentations got a little bit long and very sarcastic, so I've got major cliff notes this month. Facebook, they're up to shifty things, and in other news, water's wet. Zuckerberg had his 4-inch cushion in the courtroom, so he looked like he was 6'2" instead of 5'7". That was pretty funny. Dub announcement. Who got a ticket? Show of hands. Not many. Not as many as previous years. It's a bit of a surprise. Normally, like half the room are like, yay. Matt, did you get one?
No, I'm going Layers Cop.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so who's going over anyway to San Fran? Going over anyway without a dub ticket. AltConf, Layer, what else is there's LayersConf, there's AltConf, there's, what's the other one? There's Nextdoor, and so the Nextdoor, AltConf, Layers, and Dub.
What about the American Orthodontists Association? They're usually on about the same time.
I'll get out. No, but so basically iOS devs and other developers. Try Swift San Jose is on this year, not the same time though.
The Friday of Dub.
Oh, okay, so it's okay. Well, post that on the Slack because I didn't know about that. I've been looking, but no, it's good. So it means basically iOS devs and other developers take over the entire city of San Jose and San Francisco for a weekend, which is a week. Realistically, a weekend because most of the time you'll be in bars, so it's all good. That was pretty much it that I can think of, apart from the rumours that ARM for Mac and Apple never said that they were going to bring it out this year. They never said that. So they said not 2017 and everyone assumed 2018, whatever. No. No. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, Xcode 9.3 came out with Swift 4.1, pretty cool. A lot of the crashes are resolved. I like that. Flat map, yeah, flat map's gone. It's now compact map for specific removing of optionals. One variant of flat map is gone. Yeah. Yeah, I had to like find and replace everything. Moving on to who's hiring. Can we get any show of hands for who's hiring? Anyone from REA? Okay, no. So, do you want to go through them, or do you want to just?
Hey everyone, my name is Albert from Vent. We have an app that's been downloaded a million times between iOS and Android. Our current iOS developer is leaving to go overseas, so we're looking for a new person to come in and take over his slot. It's basically a social media app that allows people to talk about, I guess, things that are going on in their life in an anonymous way. You can catch me at Albert at vent.co. That's ALBERT@vent.co.
Is there anyone else?
If you're interested in any of those?
Oliver wants to say something.
Hello everyone. Yeah, so Oliver from CocoaHeads. Yeah, we're hiring pretty much everything, sort of junior to senior, well, probably more senior iOS developers, Android developers, looking for QA, and we're interested in people who are doing DevOps for mobile solutions as well, and potentially backend as well. So everything, more your friends. Come towards me and Sean if you're interested.
Alright, was there anyone else this time? Alright, if you're interested, you're finding those guys during the break, or Jesse will post a follow-up in the job chat.
I'll make sure I post a follow-up in the job shop. I might try and find you guys in Melbourne and things.
Yeah, cool. So for more information, yeah, follow up in jobs if you didn't hear that, which is the hashtag jobs channel in Slack. If you're not a member of the Slack, click the URL from the slide before or type it in if you remember it, and yeah, join, which is just add more noise to your Slack and more RAM usage. Now onto the presentations. We'll start off with, oh wait, no, that's out of order. Thank you, Jesse. No?
Now we do the presentations.
Oh, okay, now? Yep, righto, cool. So the first person was, I think, Alan, so I'll invite you up.
So grab a refresher, we'll get Alan set up, we'll start again in a couple of minutes. We're like dead on time. For once.
Out of that, we defined some conversations that we agreed we would have for every story that we take through development. So the first of those is the kickoff, which is primarily between developer and QA, but may also include product owner and designer. We do a lot of programming.
Sorry, I'm just going to grab your shirt here.
Grab me anywhere you like. We also do a lot of peer programming, so we have conversations at that point. When a story is dev complete, we'll do another walkthrough, or a walkthrough between developer and QA again, and then a pull request is raised, and we'll commence code review. So I'm just going to drill into each one of these conversations in a little bit more depth. The point of the conversations is to help us sort of maintain quality as we grow, knowledge share to make sure that if anyone gets hit by a bus, we're able to continue working. So the first one is the kickoff. So this is done before the developer writes any code at all. They will grab a QA, sit down, and together they will examine the acceptance criteria of the story. This is an opportunity for them to clarify concerns with product owner or designer, and have the story amended on the spot there and then before any work's done on it. It's also a chance to discuss the scope of the story. Is it too large? Do we need to split it down into smaller tasks? And we can talk about automated tests at this stage that we would write as part of the development effort. So this is great early on. It solidifies understanding. It makes sure that developers know what they're meant to be building before they pick up a story and go down the garden path and build the wrong thing. It's great for QAs. They get a lot of insight into stories early on before they have to conduct any manual testing. And it's a great chance to identify those edge cases that may have been missed by the PO when they wrote the story, and enrich the requirements of the story at that point. So, once the kickoff has been done, then the story will be moved into development. And at this point, depending on the complexity of the story, we may pair program. So this is something that we don't have hard and fast rules around, but we do have a lot of kind of organic conversations, I guess, in the team. We're quite chatty, and that will often lead into pair programming. So we found this is fantastic for getting unstuck, great for that knowledge sharing. If somebody is working on a complex story, then if they have been pairing and they're off sick for a few days, obviously somebody else can carry on with it. And it's led to faster code reviews for us. If people are pairing, then come PR time, there are less surprises, and we can get our code merged more quickly. So once the story is dev complete, then developer goes back to the QA, and the two sit down again prior to the pull request being raised and revisit the acceptance criteria, except this time with demoable working software. So this is a chance for QA to catch early faults that the developer might have missed, and the developer has an opportunity to fix any bugs up before they raise the PR. It's also a chance for the developer to mention any areas of regression that the QA might want to look out for when the story enters its testing phase. It gives the QA even more insight into the story. Once it's moved through into testing, they know that the nuts and bolts of it are working, and it frees them up to do more exploratory testing. They can really kind of hammer those edge cases. And it serves to instill a quality mindset into developers. They need to make sure that before they raise their PR, their code is working as intended. So once the walkthrough is done and everybody's happy, then the PR will be opened and we'll move into code review. Now, this is something that in the Melbourne team, we had a few teething issues early on. We were doing cross-country pull request reviews with Wellington, and it wasn't uncommon for more than 100 comments to be left on PRs and for them to be open at weeks at a time. And this obviously wasn't only inefficient, but it was super demoralizing for the authors of those PRs. So one of the things that's really helped us with this was the adoption of Swiftlint, which has all but eliminated white space and formatting comments on our PRs. And since we have now moved to sort of local reviews, we've moved away from the cross-country review system. And that, in a similar way, we do a lot of peer programming. We'll also do a lot of face-to-face PR reviews. So when a developer, or at least a developer will grab a few other devs and we'll huddle around a computer, and the author is able to kind of provide a lot of quick context and explain the rationale on the spot for any interesting decisions they may have made. It's great for getting a quick resolution as well, rather than this asynchronous conversation on GitHub where meaning may be lost in the text comments. And we've also found it's really great for onboarding. New developers can get stuck into code reviews. They can ask questions not only about the changes that have been made, but about areas of the code base that they may not be familiar with. Cool, so once the code review is done, then we'll merge the PR and the story will move on to its testing phase. So that's a little look at those core conversations that we have while we're moving stories through development. As I mentioned, really great for ensuring that we maintain quality as our team and user base grows. It reduces the likelihood of stories making it through to testing, only to be kicked back to development because bugs are found, which is inefficient. And it's great for knowledge sharing, making sure that we can continue work if other people are off sick. So now I'll just touch briefly on some of the things that we do to stay on the same page across the teams in different regions. So quite simply, we have a meeting once a week between developers in all the different areas. We have an open agenda that people can contribute to. And we found that it's really great for, it serves as a platform for questions to be asked that may otherwise go unasked, and for people to raise ideas. We have a lot of smart people spread around the place and we all want to be able to access their brains. We found it's been really imperative for us in terms of identifying tech debt and initiating a resolution for it. And it's a chance for teams to discuss upcoming work, spread that knowledge and make sure we don't step on each other's toes. When there are upcoming pieces of work that will impact the rest of the teams, we often have more in-depth sessions. So most recently, Wellington has been working on a syncing framework that will be shared across the teams once it's completed. And they've been really great at sort of running in-depth sessions with us to get our input into it, explain the rationale for the decisions that they've made. So it gets our buy-in early on and helps ensure that we'll be happy consumers of that library once it's complete. Yeah, so that's a quick look at the communication side of things in the iOS team at Xero. Now Alan's going to talk a bit about how we coordinate our coding effort.
Cool. Can I do this again?
Yeah, you can.
Is that inappropriate? It's fine. You do that. No, you do that. Right. Thanks. I'm just babysitting my computer there again.
All right. So I'll talk a little bit about our coordination of coding efforts, and it's mainly from a perspective of dependency management and a branching strategy, as I mentioned earlier. So we start off with dependency management. Any apps that you write these days, you'll likely come across some recurring problems like networking, JSON parsing, perhaps authentication and session management. So we quickly decided to resolve these problems in their own libraries, and and we use CocoaPods to manage them. So we have all the good stuff around automation, the unit testing, the semantic versioning, all that kind of good stuff. So obviously this allows us to not have to solve the same problem over and over again. But to me, the most important thing that I can see getting out of this model is that this particular setup imposes a hard boundary around these problems to force us to think about separation of concern properly. And one specific library that I'd like to make a special mention of is our shared UI library. This library is developed with design input. Its aim is to be a bridge between design and developers. So at Xero, there is a standardized design language which is used to describe elements from colors to UX patterns. And we tried our best to translate this particular language down into code so we can apply a consistent, we have an easier time applying a consistent user experience across all our apps. And it also serves to minimize our miscommunications. And internally, we adopt an open source model. That means whoever requiring a change or a fix to a specific library, they're free to do so. Obviously, there's still going to be a pull request process, but the idea is that everybody owns the code. It's a collective ownership model which encourages that quality is everybody's responsibility. And we really try to push for that at Xero. So obviously with all these libraries lying around, it's going to be problematic when you try to manage different development processes around it. So if you imagine that you have one feature branch on the app, and then you have to duplicate that kind of feature branch across to different libraries too, and that if you multiply that by the number of teams and the number of developers on them, that gets out of hand really, really quickly. And that's when we decided to adopt a much, much simpler model, and that is single branch development. With that little picture there, it looks like it's got a branch, but it's meant to denote pull requests, which are branches in GitHub, and releases. So around release time, we cut a branch, stabilize it, and actually release it. After that's done, it gets merged back into the main branch really, really, really quickly. And the key there is that it doesn't live for too long for it to become a problem. Like I mentioned, that we use GitHub, so everybody gets to make a fork from the main repository, and when they get to make pull requests, these all have to merge into the one branch. And there are no rules, obviously, on how you want to manage your branches on your own forks. And this gives us a lot of benefits. So first of all, there is no more merge hell because you don't have to have branches that you have to merge into. So anybody got time for that? So the longer branches live, the more divergent they become, and then the more divergent they are, the harder it is to bring them back in. So we're really happy to not have to do any more of those things today. This model exposes integration problems way earlier than any other form. You don't have, every time you create a pull request, CI comes along, picks up the latest code on the main branch, merges all your pull request codes into it, and then runs all the checks and tests on top of it. So this makes sure that it's in This makes sure that the code is always in a good state, and should the need arise, we can release this code with very little difficulty. And obviously, because there's only one branch, there's a single source of truth, it drastically simplifies communications. We don't have any more questions like, oh, is branch X up to date? Or is which branch X or branch Y, which one has the latest code of whatever? And we don't have to ask questions like, oh, which branches do we have to pick to put into a single integration branch in order to do testing? So again, time savings. And this is one of my personal favorites, death of stale branches. So you might find this familiar. GitHub marks branches as stale after a period of inactivity. And when that happens over time, what you'll find is that when you go into the stale branches list, you'll find all these branches staying around, somehow all updated long time ago. Thousands of commits behind, but always with just a few commits ahead. So it drives me nuts when I see things like this. I can't actually go in and easily clean up this if I wanted to. I have to actually spend a lot of time looking at these commits, understand these commits, to see whether they're still useful, whether there's still a point in keeping them. But most of the time, I just run away from it. So I am happy that we don't have to do that anymore, which also translates to time savings. And lastly, and definitely not the least, developer discipline has, as we observed, increased, because now when you break something in the main branch, it affects everybody. I imagine it would have slowed us down a little bit initially, especially, but we feel like that over time that this wasn't, it just happened quite naturally. So with all that in mind, it seems like it's pretty crazy to go with this kind of model, because the only way that you can write any kind of feature and get it merged into the main branch is by writing the entirety of it and then do a merge, which is far worse, because instead of having feature branches on a repository, you have all these feature branches on everybody's forks, which is hardly any kind of improvement. And there's no way, so basically there's no way to write small incremental changes, or is there? That's when feature toggles come in. Feature toggles are pretty straightforward concepts. They are a way to turn features on or off within code. Our implementation is pretty straightforward. We use user defaults to indicate that. And on top of that, we have a UI to turn certain things on or off. None of these features, so none of the features that are in progress are not behind a feature toggle. So basically everything is behind a feature toggle until complete. So these features that are in progress are never turned on for production builds, and they can be accessed on demand in development builds. So how do we toggle? It's, again, very simple. First of all, we're going to create a feature toggle, and as you can see, it's a type there that wraps around the string, which gets used as the key to the user defaults dictionary to turn things on or off. Then we get to use the toggle. So if a feature is turned on, then you do one thing. Otherwise, you do the original thing that was there. So the if statement is simple. Everybody understands it. And the other thing that's interesting there is that we have a view controller old, which is evidently the copy of view controller, the duplicate of view controller prior to the change being made. So this allows us to be able to go and keep making changes to view controller without having to worry about what's already in production, existing code in production breaking. And this is actually quite powerful. And the reason why we go with view controller old is because we get to keep all the commit histories for view controller. And it'll be the same story for interface builder documents. You can either duplicate the entire document or duplicate a scene if you have a storyboard, for example. Then we get to do what we do best. We build, we test, and we commit. And when we think it's ready, we remove the feature toggle. And because it's all statically checked by the compiler, we know where these places are, and it's pretty straightforward to go and actually delete the old code associated with the feature toggle. And we get to release. That's it. We get to party. So it gives us a lot of benefits. So first up, we have autonomy. There's very light coordination between teams. We ask the question. We drop a question on Slack saying, is all your code ready to go or behind a feature toggle? And most of the time the answer is yes. And in the cases where the answer is no, it takes a little bit of stabilization before the answer turns into a yes, so we go on to release anyway. And yeah, so the code is basically defined in two states. One, it's behind a feature toggle, or two, it's ready to go to production. And like I mentioned before, there is no existing code harmed during development. And it opens up possibilities for us. We're not doing any of these things at the moment, but we could extend our feature toggling framework to do things like A/B testing or canary releases. And for those of you who don't know what canary releases are, it's just basically a way to gradually roll out your features to production, well, to your users. And my favorite quality of it all is that it's simple. It takes 5 minutes to explain to someone new coming on board, and it takes 5 minutes to get started. And obviously, nothing's perfect. Here's some of the caveats. It's lifetime. The lifetimes of feature toggles need to be reasonably short. It's simple, but it's still complexity. And the complexity can be amplified if you had multiple feature toggles with interdependencies. And the longer they live for, the more likely that becomes. And my homeboy Ecstasy Zibbit has just the right word for this situation. He's just so wise, isn't he? I don't know how he does it. You can manage it from several, from different perspectives. One is to keep your working areas separate. So you could have one team focusing on one area and another team focusing on different ones, so to minimize the stepping on each other's toes, obviously. And you could always just try to keep the task sizes small, which will require a little bit of planning, but in our experience, it easily pays for itself. And like Sam mentioned earlier, that we have a lot of collaboration even before we get to building the thing that we need to build anyway. And as I kept on mentioning, it is still complexity, and in some situations, it could just be purely that and nothing else. One such scenario could be that your changes are just too small, in which case you're really just adding work for yourself. And the other one is that the changes are too big. In these kind of situations, I generally ask the question of whether we could meaningfully break this big chunk of work, down to smaller chunks, hide behind a feature toggle, and ship it incrementally. And if you can't do that, if it's not possible, you might actually be better off creating a feature branch and have frequent merges going into that feature branch from the main branch. But I should add that this particular scenario should be exceedingly rare. We had to do it once for the migration between Swift 2 to 3 because we couldn't possibly keep the two versions of code in the code base and compile them. The correctness could be a concern because feature toggles, as we've implemented it, is still code, and that could have bugs in them. That just means that the authors of pull requests and the reviewers need to be extra careful around catching these kind of things. You might miss certain places where you need to put feature toggles. And we've certainly had that happening during code reviews, but we never actually had this going out to production accidentally. So that's been working out quite well for us. Testing becomes slightly trickier because you need to have a way to dynamically turn things on or off for your tests, for the tests that you're writing for the new code, etc., etc. And this is interesting because I came across this recently myself, and this is slightly trickier than just adding code. With code addition, it's pretty easy to add a toggle in to say, oh, if you turn this toggle on, you execute this new code. But with code removal, you might have to do some refactoring first to get it to a point where it's easy to toggle. And that refactoring may not necessarily be trivial. But yeah, that's something to keep in mind. So putting them all together, this has been a fantastic model, and it's worked really well for us. And I could not stress enough the prevailing quality of it, and that its simplicity. Everyone understands it. And that directly translates to the time savings that we have. We don't have to fight process for the sake of having process. And we can actually focus on delivering value for our customers. And here are some further readings. So single branch development, also known as trunk-based development, isn't a new idea. The website trunkbaseddevelopment.com has some really, really good insights. And there's also the write-up for feature toggles on martinfowler.com, highly recommended. Google's been doing trunk-based development for a long, long time, and they've got lots of literature around it. So the article there, with a really long URL, has a lot of content inside, lots and lots of numbers, something like 50 million commits per month, which is just crazy. And there's also the monolith repo at Google talk that sort of covers the same thing. And with that, that concludes our talk. Any questions?
Hey, awesome talk. Good to hear how other people are solving problems, so thank you very much. One of the things that seemed a bit odd is pull requests after a walkthrough. In the instance where a particular bit of work is rather large, does that then flow that the pull request itself to get that work done is rather large and as such puts more onus on the reviewer and more work on them instead of keeping the pull request rather small and allowing incremental pull requests until a particular feature is done?
Cool. So we try to encourage small pull requests. obviously. So that should get around a lot of those problems. But sometimes it's certain pull requests are just bigger than others, which is what we found to be working really well, because when we have a reasonably big pull request, reviewing it can be really difficult without context. And that's what Sam was talking about earlier, where when you have the author actually driving the conversation and pointing out the places where certain shortcuts, certain decisions might have been made, it's a lot easier. So we've, so I guess to answer your question, we do try to encourage small pull requests, and I believe that's what we do most of the time. But yeah, this particular model has worked quite well for us.
So, follow-up question. Does that mean that it's always one pull request to one story, or can it be many pull requests to a single story?
Yeah, so it's definitely can be many pull requests for a single story, so as many as needed. So that the feature toggle could stay in there for as long as it's needed, hopefully not too long, but for as long as it's needed, so that all the changes can go into the code that's hidden behind the feature toggle, so that when we're ready to go, we can remove the old code and just get it out.
Okay, really good talk, I really enjoyed it. With the walkthrough, we've tried to implement it realistic from the review, and we've also found that we always found the problem that the QA is not available when a code is complete and you're able to walk through that. Is that a problem that you have? How many QAs do developers do you have that you don't have that problem?
I must say we don't really have that problem. We haven't really come across that particular issue of being QAs being unavailable. We've only got the one QA, mind you, for both our iOS and Android teams, and she's just doing a great job, and she's always been picking up things. But yeah, I guess we haven't really had that situation. Yeah.
You mentioned you got the single branch. When you cut a release branch, how do all your programmers, work with the release branch? How does that work?
Do you mean generally what happens after cutting release branch?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So when the release branch is cut, we have a small set of process in which we make sure that all our feature toggles that need to go to release are removed. And then really it's just a matter of bumping the version numbers, et cetera, to create a pull request going into a branch. And that's when CI comes in to do the rest. So Fastlane comes in and basically just sends it out to App Store, and that was it. If we ever find any problems during that particular period, we try to we fix it on the release candidate branch, and then have another build. After that's done, when Apple approves our changes, that goes into the main branch.
I definitely agree with the feature toggles. It's been a great boon to quite a few projects we've worked on.
Awesome.
One that did catch us out is if you use Apple frameworks that are added under a feature toggle. I'll call out Apple Health in particular. Apple will not allow you to include Apple Health if it isn't actually a feature in your app. So if you've got Apple Health toggled off, they won't accept it unless it's a feature. So it caught us out and actually took quite a bit of rework to now change our whole process. So just if you're expecting to add frameworks, and I don't know whether it applies to camera and a bunch of other things, but just watch out on that one. That causes quite a bit of pain around Apple Health.
Oh, cool. Thanks for the tip.
I imagine accounting software doesn't get it wrong.
Yeah, probably not.
Hey, really enjoy your talk. Have you been with a case where the feature toggles need to be there in your master or develop branch, and then you carve out build and release it to App Store? But product A has the features, but product B and C do not have it. So have you been ever exposed to that kind of scenario?
So I'm trying to pass the question. So
feature toggles in your frameworks or shared libraries.
Feature toggles in shared libraries. Yeah, so shared libraries could have feature toggles themselves. What we do is that we expose that feature toggle via that particular from that particular shared library, and that actually gets into the list of features that's available from the app, and the app is then free to turn it on or off.
So you could have multiple products using that shared library go into production, but it's not enabled for all of them yet.
Correct.
Does that mean you have a shared feature toggle library?
It does, but that's all that is the, like I mentioned earlier, that particular user default implementation plus a UI on top. We try to keep it simple so it doesn't become a liability itself. Hi.
Hello. So you mentioned the story of sharing the library that you use between your apps. Well, apps on the web, I'm not sure. But like you sort of glossed over and didn't really talk about it, so I just wondered if you could go into more depth in that. And also, you said like you share UI between platforms, then how does that really work in terms of like iOS apps should look like iOS, Android should look like Android, web should look like web, so how do you deal with that with the shared UI library as well?
I can't speak for Android, but with our particular library, the vision for it is that when designers come up and say, look, this particular component needs to look like this, it needs to behave like this, it needs to have these kind of colors, and these kind of colors actually have names, that's what that language describes, and that's what's actually in the code. When the designer says primary text color, we know what that is because it's all in the code. In terms of, there's also components that's also available around, say, a cell that contains a text field, for example. Yeah, so there are certain things that, like I said, in UX patterns that are described, and we try to translate that into that code so that people can just come along and say, no, I'll include that particular pod, and then that will be available. It is a shared library. Yes. Yes, in our case, yeah. So I believe Android has its own, but like I said, I can't speak for them.
Just quickly on the Android topic, I know a lot of businesses it's topical to say or to decide whether your teams are structured as an iOS team, Android team, or a mixture of both, and kind of have feature delivery teams across skill teams. So how do you? I assume you've got an Android app. Is that correct? Yeah.
We do, yeah.
So does iOS lead sort of feature development and then Android follows, or are you both doing it at the same time, or you've got a mixture of iOS and Android people in the same team? How does that work?
So we do have teams being separate, but we're co-located quite closely together. And what our PO tries to do is he keeps us all on the same level of feature parity. So historically, there's not been a parity. Which we've actually resolved now, and we try to keep it at that level as much as we can.
You don't have sort of iOS and Android people working in the same team with a back-end person?
No, we don't. Unfortunately, it's actually one of the things that we hope to be able to do. We hope to be able to divide up a team that would have that would be able to provide experience all across, rather than iOS team, Android team, us versus them. Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me, but right now it's a little bit hard to change. Hi.
You said that you have like a UI open source library approach. How do you deal with regression testing when someone changes one of the UI components?
So it's not necessarily just for UI, it's for all the shared libraries that we have. So semantic versioning actually helps us quite a lot. Because we use CocoaPods, all the apps get to lock particular versions of libraries that they're using. And as Sam was talking about earlier, we have a lot of communication in between development teams. And we could actually talk about when some of these things have changed and how that might impact other teams, and we can move to a resolution quickly from that point of view. Yeah, does that answer your question? Yeah. Sort of.
What's the advantage of using your feature toggles compared to, say, environment variables and like a hash, if, and some environment variables to enable stuff?
It's just easier. So there's less of messing around with environment variables and you inbuilt settings, etc. So that
can be automated though.
Oh, I guess it could, but we just try to keep it simple. We just kept it simple, and it's like I say, it's been working out quite well for us. I guess technically, there's probably very little difference. Yeah.
I just had a question about your use of CocoaPods managing dependencies. Just want to know how many libraries you're using as libraries you've got to share components. The reason I'm asking from the background is I've worked on a project before which had a lot of CocoaPods and for internal dependencies, like sub-libraries, and the overhead of managing the semantic versioning and across all requests, dependencies and stuff just became a huge burden on the team, a large team. So there's a lot of churn on CocoaPods versions and dependency graphs. A bit crazy. I'm just wondering if you've encountered that problem, or you see it as a problem, or stuff like that.
Absolutely. We actually, this is sort of like an ongoing conversation that we have. We originally started off managing our own workspace and a whole bunch of submodules, and we tried to use that particular model to rather than CocoaPods, I suppose. What we ended up finding was that the more we use it, okay, mind you, we didn't have proper semantic versioning back in the day when we were using submodules, which made things worse. But one of the biggest problems that we had was when we're managing our own workspace and with submodules, while it compiles and everything, there is certain bits that will have to certain problems we have to come across. Namely, when you have the build configuration that's not the default, like release or debug. And then you sort of have to, so I found a handy little script inside of the CocoaPods to do just that. And then I had to include that in our build phase. And then I was basically like, we're doing that. Well, we're copying the script over into our workspace. And it's basically just CocoaPods without any of the automation. So we may as well just do that. So there was an effort to bring everything over to CocoaPods, and during that, within part of that effort, we also instated semantic versioning, which helped a great deal. But there is still a lot of churn, and the biggest problem that we have right now is how much delay there is when updating a library, particularly one that's being dependent on by a lot of other libraries. That you have to wait for that to publish, and then update all these things on the downstream, etc., and then days later you get to the app. So, yeah.
So from that comment, I'm taking that you don't have a minor repo for everything. You've got each component in a separate repo, and you're publishing. Are you publishing an artifact somewhere, or are you just pointing the pods out to get repos?
We publish pod specs out to our own GitHub repo. Yeah, yeah. So unfortunately, we don't really have a good answer there. I suppose we could try to fall back to what we had before, and that was submodules, which allowed us to be able to create multiple pull requests that are linked together, and CI won't be able to build them because until you've merged the actual downstream repository, because that ref won't exist. And that might actually work better now because it's faster. The dev story is slightly better. And if we keep using semantic versioning properly, it might actually be a faster experience. But I guess we haven't really had it wasn't so painful that we have to go and do everything.
The other key question I have is, you've got these CocoaPods. Do you actually have many consumers of your modules?
Yeah, so we have 4 or 5 apps, and then they all have. We have one particular pod that manages authentication, so that's one consistent experience, and we have I can think of 3 or 4 that's actually consuming that one particular pod.
And actually, from my first question, you didn't actually say how many libraries you maintain.
Off the top of my head, it's about 6. Yeah, it's not a giant number.
Any more questions, guys? Yeah.
Thanks.
I wanted to ask, with your feature toggles, are they purely for developers so that they can merge code in and they turn it on when they're developing their feature in the future, or is it also used for like the QA team? They toggle the feature on so they can test it, or do they only test it once it's fully complete and the switch is turned on or removed?
No, they get to use the feature toggle as well. So we have a UI to toggle it on and off, and then they remember to go there and turn it on and off. So there's also an additional step prior to release that they would check that the release build actually has those things aren't accidentally released, and no weird side effects, etc., etc.
Is it? Cool.
Thanks, guys.
Cool.
That was great.
Thanks.
Turn that one on. Yep. Check. So we don't have any microphone like apparatus here, so we've got a box holding up Jet's laptop, and I'm going to put this in the top of the water thing and see what happens. But you got to talk loudly anyway.
I'll just mime. Can you hear?
Oh.
I'm gonna have to code like that. All right.
It's got a good little.
You just need to stand next to it.
I can hold it like that.
That's a nice little reverb.
Okay, so today.
You don't have to hold it.
I look like a drunk, you know, like hey.
Well, while you introduce, you can hold it, and then I'll deal with that.
Okay. So today I'm here to talk about vapor, not viper. Yeah, so there's quite a few web frameworks that came out since Swift was open sourced, and I chose kind of half randomly to have a look at Vapor, and the community seems to be pretty good. They are iterating really fast. They're already on 3.0. The first release candidate was announced, I think, 2 months ago, and they're already almost reaching stable on most of their repos. So it's really moving fast, and it's interesting. So I'm going to be talking about how you can write Swift to make an API or website, and if you do so, you may want to share some of your code with an app to avoid duplication, and that would be really nice if we could do that. So it's not a talk about like in-depth intro to Vapor, because I only started discovering Vapor like a couple of weeks ago. It's not about HTML and CSS. If you know HTML and CSS and see my code, you're just going to cry. And I'm not advocating a single setup. I just came up with like a stupid sample project just to showcase a few ideas. And I'll try to highlight when there's other ways you could do the same thing. But it's mostly a way to see how in the future we could like maybe write your own mock server, or even your production API, or any kind of web service that you would need that you could write in Swift. So let's have a look at this. So if you want to know more about Vapor, you should check those URLs. And I don't know if you remember, but a couple of years ago, or a few years ago, any tutorial that you wanted to look at to learn iOS was like a Twitter client. And everything was just, it was like the hello world of iOS. And since I'm also doing server side now, I thought, why not reinvent completely Twitter, you know, like in a 20 minutes version of Twitter. So I can't really use the same word, but I stayed in the theme of birds and bird sounds. So I'm going to show you tonight chirper. It's kind of awkward to say chirps for tweets and chirper for Twitter. And I kind of dug my own grave on that one, but let's go ahead and start and see how that works with the mic and all that stuff. Can you still hear me or not? I can just shout as well, so it's also an option. All right, so if you download the Vapor command line toolbox, it helps you to create a templated project and generates the Xcode project for you. And you would start with something that looks very similar to this. I've changed a few bits, and we're going to keep working on it together to okay. No, you don't see anything. Oh, that's interesting. Isn't it mirroring? All right. That's a demo effect, we call it.
You ain't good at the demo, guys.
There we go.
All right, so you would see something that you download the command line tools from Vapor, and you create a new project, and you would pretty much see that instead of chirps, you would see to do, and that's their template. And if you're not familiar with the way web projects work, the main entry points to your project will be the routes. So that's where the requests arrive, and you decide how to handle those requests. And so far, we handle just one type of paths and 3 HTTP verbs. So we can do a get on chirps and a post on chirps to create a chirp, or we can delete chirps.
I'm sold already.
Can you edit?
You cannot edit chirps yet. So if we run that project, that's pretty much what you get. Like, you don't have to write any code, and you get something very similar to that from the Vapor toolbox. And you build and run that, and it's going to take, oh yeah, I must have cleaned just before the start. That's a good idea, so you can enjoy the length of the first build. So you won't see much that's really interesting in the browser, but we're still going to have a look. So somewhere here, come on, it's about time to build. All right, it's going to run on localhost 8080, and you can start hitting that that host.
So what is it? It's built as a macro stack, or?
What do you mean?
Like, your Vapor generates some project. What is the project? Is it a macOS native app, or?
Yeah, it runs on Linux, on macOS, and by default, the project says that it can run on any other kind of platform, like tvOS and stuff, but I don't know why. It's mostly for macOS and Linux. So let's have a look at localhost 8080. If you hit /chirps, we haven't added any in the database, so all we have is a JSON empty array. So it's probably more interesting to look at it through PAW, and let's see. You can see that if you hit this from localhost 8080 with a get verb and chirps, you have an empty array. So let's create a chirp that says, "Hello, CocoaHeads." I am zooming in on my computer, but there's a bit of lag. It's great. How can I maybe change the resolution of the screen?
No, don't.
All right.
We'll believe you.
There'll be video evidence on YouTube later. Yeah.
So here I just in the browser again. That's the first chirp. It's a JSON speed out. So now let's go back to the project and try and add an HTML page so that we can actually see something that's in a human readable format. So let's say we're going to add a route at the path, just the empty path, and it will be handled by an index handler. And now we can go and have a look at our controller. That's pretty empty. And the listing for the API, it's just querying the chirps and returning all of them. And there's a feature that's just the way the threading is handled. I don't have time to go into detail with this.
It's the future.
And if we write an index handler, all we do is, instead of returning a raw object, we want to return a view. And what a view is just you ask a template renderer to generate a view, and you pass it some values. So here we are getting all the chirp objects, and we map them to a view. And to do so, we create a template renderer called leaf renderer, and say use the index template and look at the key chirps, and you will have some chirps. And
compact map.
And unfortunately, the template engine uses a syntax that Xcode doesn't know yet, but pretty much that's what you get in a template. So it's HTML with a few extra keys that the template renderer can use. So if we rebuild this and run, we now have an extra handler for the empty path, and if we try and hit that URL, we have 0 chirps because in dev environment, the database is only in memory, so it doesn't persist to disk. So let's quickly create a few chirps like this. And now we can reload the page, and now we have a few chirps. It's really ugly because there's no CSS, and there's this giant yen guy that keeps spamming the service with some lorem ipsum. So let's change that. And in the configuration, let's enable serving static files, because obviously your Swift code can render a template and can render like a JSON collection of objects or whatever, but you may want to also serve some static files. So there's this concept of middlewares and services and providers that you can all read about on the documentation. The only thing I want to highlight here is the default API template that you get when you create a new project doesn't serve static files probably for security reasons. And here in the public, I have added some CSS and a few images. So if we build and run again, and let's populate the in-memory database again, and if I reload that page, suddenly I have a much better looking website. That's why I'm so unprepared, is because I spent 3 days writing CSS. Just to reach that point. So here the creation date is still just the value of the timestamp, and we're going to work on that a bit. Let's try and hit with Paul the API to delete chirp number 2, the spammy one with the lorem ipsum, and if we reload, it's gone, obviously. All right, so we have 3 endpoints that allows us to list the messages, to create messages, and to delete messages. And we have one web page accessible that renders HTML and CSS. That's for the server side. So we have Chirper. I can't zoom in, yeah, but so that's, you have your modal file here. It's backed by SQLite, and there's no point in going into too much details with that. So let's have a look at an iOS app that would work with that. So we have a view controller. It's a lot crowded when you zoom in. So with a pull to refresh table view that just shows you a list of messages, you're hitting the same endpoint /chirps with a get by default, and you deserialize the JSON that you get. You try to construct chirp objects, and you render that on the screen. So let's try and have a look. Why is it opening another one? I don't know. Oh, it's the plus. Okay. And in the meantime, let's add some more randomly generated messages. So now we have Chirper for iOS. Come on, buddy. There you go. There's nothing. We pull to refresh, and we see some messages here showing. And here, you can't really see, but you'll have to take my word for it. The rendering of the creation date has been rendered slightly different, but still, it's not great.
Zooming doesn't work across the FTP.
Yeah. All right. I won't try to zoom in. How can I do that? I don't know. Doesn't like? Nah, all right. No, it doesn't like that.
Don't go to the top.
What was the next step after that? Oh yeah. So at the moment, I've redefined the same object in my iOS client, and I have the same modal object in the server side. What would be great is to have like some sort of shared library using CocoaPods or Carthage or subprojects or whatever solution you want. And the simplest I could come up with to showcase that is to create another Xcode project and put all three, the Vapor one, the iOS one, and the shared framework, all of them in a workspace. So let's do that now. Yep, let's stop that.
Are you okay with that, Oliver?
Yes. Does he need to be okay with it?
So we have ChirpKit with a protocol for chirp properties. And for now, there's nothing yet. It's just a basic setup where you have two frameworks, one for iOS, one for macOS for the server side. And so we're going to have files in those two targets, and we're going to put those targets into as embedded libraries into these other projects. So that's for the ChirpKit for now. So let's go in Xcode and go new workspace, and let's call that Chirper. And now in Chirper, we're going to add Chirper Web, if I can. And we're going to add Chirper iOS. Nope. And finally, ChirpKit. So there's several different ways to do that, to share code between several projects. And I just took this one because it seemed to be the simplest one for that effect. So now we have several schemes, one for the Chirper iOS, one for ChirpKit, and one for the running the server. And this one, I don't know why it just showed up. Doesn't matter. So in Chirper iOS, let's go and link a framework. And it's going to be ChirpKit for iOS. And in Chirper Web, the Vapor app, in the app, we're going to add Chirper for macOS. Right, you can't really read that. You have to take my word for it, sorry. They are internal dependencies. Like you don't have to use Vapor to use, for example, their template engine or their SQLite database kind of thing. Like all of this is completely modular, and you can use as many as you want. You can use third party or first party or none of them, or you can replace with whatever. It seems really modular. I haven't used that modularity yet. So the next step is to, what was the next step? Yes, we're actually going to make the framework useful by actually putting things in it. So here, what is it? Chirp properties. All right, so we pretty much have the same object in Chirper for iOS. We had a chirp that has an author message and some creation and update date objects, and the modal on the server side is very similar. Now maybe we want to share and even enhance that. So in ChirpKit, we have those properties, chirp properties, and there's an extra one, message length, that none of them implement. And we're going to even provide, why not, a default implementation. So message length is just the count of characters in the message. And let's try and make sure that the app and the server side now use that. So on the iOS side, we're going to import ChirpKit. Maybe we need to build once, so it realized that it can have ChirpKit, and we're going to add chirp properties. And on the server side, we're going to just add an extension saying that we want to, what's the word?
Chirp properties.
No, we want to conform to that protocol. That's the word. Nope, that's not what I wanted. Oh, I need to import ChirpKit here. All right, so now that our modals on the iOS and the server side have the extra message length behavior, and it's already implemented by default, let's see how we can use that. So for example, in the chirp controller, instead of just returning an array of chirps, we will return a structure that is encodable that has extra data about the object, because for some reason Vapor doesn't see this extra property that's been added by a protocol extension. So let's say we have a struct called chirp information context, because this thing that you pass here to the template engine is called the rendering context. So it's the variable that you want to give it to. So we make it encodable, and let's say that it will have a chirp, and it will have a message length. And all we need to do now is take this array of chirps that we get here, and let's map it to a chirp, no, not properties, chirp information context. So it will just take the chirp that we had as the first parameter, and here it will take message length. I would be glad if the autocompletion would work and prove that what I'm doing kind of works. And will I have, maybe I need to change my scheme. No, not this one. All right. And is Xcode going to like that or not? Last time I forgot to change the platform requirements. I had to like kill the deref data and rebuild from scratch, and it took like 10 minutes.
You still have similar select as the destination.
Say again?
You still have similar select as the destination.
Yep, that's a good one. Is that going to help?
Do you need to throw in chirp information?
Yeah, so here instead of chirps, we're going to have chirp informations. And I have a backup project on the side like this, like to the end state. So if this happens, I can just switch to the other one. I may do that if in 1 minute it's still not building. We'll need to change the template to instead of iterating through an array of chirps, it's going to iterate through an array of chirp informations. And all right, let's have a look. Yes, this template that Xcode doesn't know what kind of syntax it is. So here we are dealing with chirp information, and the chirp is a sub-property of the chirp information. So let's just do this. And we'll just show the message length, which is on chirp information dot message length. And this, if I'm not cursed, should work. And again, let's put some chirps in the database and reload. And now we have the character count. So if you wanted to know that this lorem ipsum here is 838 characters, it's really interesting to see that, for example, this emoji is considered only one character at the moment. But let's go back to this. We have done that on the server side, on the web interface. Now let's try and bring the same feature to the iOS client. So the iOS client, we've declared conformance to chirp properties. So let's go and see in the table view cell and say, instead of receiving a chirp, you're receiving a chirp properties, which you don't know because you need to import. And all right, so now I can populate the message length label and say all right, there's no localization, there's no handling of plurals and all that kind of stuff. Who needs that? And no, I don't need to. I need to have the server running, and I need to build and run the iOS app. And let's put some chirps in the database. And let's see what's happening. Can you see what I'm saying? Yes. And the simulator is reloading. It's great. Very, very captive audience. No one's saying anything. They're like waiting. Is it going to crash? All right. Let's pull to refresh. And now we have, you can't see it actually, that's great because it's too small. Can you see that here? So you have the same character count, and so the point is, like, it's really underwhelming, but the point is that the implementation of that, which is just a one-liner, is in the framework, and I didn't have to implement that in the iOS client and on the server. It's really underwhelming because really counting characters is not hard. But let's try and see that if in ChirpKit, for example, it was before the string were strings were revamped in Swift 3, I think, or 4. It was actually giving you the count of like all the Unicode code points. So, for example, for the family emoji, it's actually 11 characters, and that's why I have this sample message here. So, yeah, you again can't see it, that's a bit stupid, but and if we rerun the server again, and you get what's going to happen, it's going to work in the same way on the server. And that's the point I was trying to reach, is that with a very underwhelming example, we can share code, but like the modal, we can, because of the way Vapor works and that it needs to implement its own modal, so it's only done through a protocol, so it's not as tight as one could wish, but the implementation of some properties can be shared, and it means that, for example, for business logic that would be a bit more involved, for example, sorting objects, and you want that to be consistent on the way the chirps would be sorted on the web interface and on the iOS client, so you surface like the most important or the most likes or whatever. All of this logic, instead of having to duplicate it between the two clients, the web app and the iOS client, you can have one central point, and because it's all Swift, you can have it in one workspace, in one window in Xcode, and it's just happier. Now we have 11 characters for the family. Yeah, I think there was way more things that I wanted to show to exemplify the same thing, but I guess you get the point. Like, for example, I could have rendered the timestamp with like saying 10 minutes ago and 3 minutes and 24 seconds ago. What's interesting for us iOS developers is that it's Swift code with libraries that we know, Foundation and the date components formatter and stuff like this. So you can write that once in a shared framework, and then you can have the same functionality using types, type safety of Swift and the types that you know, and the power of Foundation on both platforms. And I think that's really exciting because before I started as an iOS dev, I did a bit of PHP development, web development in PHP, and now that I have this knowledge of Swift and how powerful the Apple platform and the Apple frameworks are, I'm really excited to be able to use that on the web. There's obviously one limitation here. Again, it's like one of those things that I said, like, I went for the easiest setup. It deploys, the server runs on the Mac, so if you're running on Linux, you won't have all of the Apple frameworks. But I guess those problems are going to be less and less as time comes. So yeah, that's about it. That's Vapor 3.0. It's going to reach stable status very soon, and you should all have a look. And that's it.
Couldn't help but notice that Vapor has a lot of dependencies. I was just curious if you thought any of those, so I assume all those dependencies are pure Swift code.
Say again?
All the dependencies pure Swift. Like there's just Swift code that builds up Vapor?
Yeah, Vapor is pure Swift. The leaf template thing it's like a pseudo language within the language, but it's the parser and all of this is written in Swift. The entire thing is in Swift. It's all open source, and it's like, I think there's 40 contributors. The other day on Slack, someone was saying, oh, there's not enough documentation. Where, like, should we always hit the help channel on Slack if we have questions? And people said, yes, most of the knowledge of the new API and the changes is shared across 40 people, but they know that, and they are writing more and more documentation. There's API documentation, but there's also like the starter guide and stuff like this on their website. That's pretty good, but they're going to improve it and improve it.
If I remember correctly, some of this Vapor stuff is based on Swift project stuff as well. Like there's server Swift projects and the Swift level projects. But anyway, my key question was actually more around your thoughts on whether or not some of the projects that are sub-projects of Vapor are actually useful within apps. Like, for example, the template that looks like if you're doing like embedded HTML content within your app or something, or using HTML render.
I see what you mean.
Use the template.
I only started looking at Vapor 2 weeks ago. It seems like if you want to use them like within iOS, maybe it's a bit of an overkill because they come with a lot. They are built. They had to reinvent a few wheels because they can't use some of the Apple frameworks that you don't have on Linux. So I think you could take a few shortcuts and have a more lightweight dependency rather than having their entire, like, I don't know if the parser is rewritten from scratch or whatever, but I assume that some of their dependencies, you could bypass them if you're on an Apple platform because you would probably have like the default Apple things. But supposedly by design, all of their repos can be used separately. And they obviously have like the main core repo that brings it all together and all that kind of stuff, but you could use the SQLite ORM as a standalone, supposedly. I haven't tried, but that's how it's advertised.
Cool.
Matt, you had a question, right?
Yep.
I'm not taking questions from Matt.
To sort of follow on from Oliver's question, do you see the templating which is used in Vapor as being beneficial towards code generation libraries and stuff like that?
You mean using the templating language for code generation? I didn't think of that. I don't know if it's limited to HTML, and at the moment, the problem with their templating engine is that there's only a few keywords, and it's only like you have a for loop, you have if statement, and you can just print the value of a variable. You can extend it and add your own tags. For example, if you want to generate like an HTML image tag with just the name of the asset, for example, and it just does all the boring thing for you, you'd have to write that yourself. You can extend that. I assume that they're going to keep adding to it. But for code generation, like to generate Swift code or another language code that's not HTML and CSS, I don't know if that would be very interesting because I think it's trying to be just for HTML.
Okay.
Sorry, when are we getting the CocoaHeads website written in Swift?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite compelling. As a PHP developer who's been writing a lot of PHP, that looks like the Swift version of some of the more popular web frameworks. If they're talking about the code generation or this kind of view parsing that they're doing, if they're going to become a full-scale web framework, they've got a lot of work to do. Like the full-scale PHP web frameworks or other Java or Python web frameworks have got 10 years in front of the Swift system. But it's super compelling to be able to share your model between the two things. In your experience at the moment, have you looked at where you might deploy that server or something like that? I mean, it's great having it on your local server and a local machine, and it's already took a long time for PHP to be able to do that sort of thing. But
one of the wow effects of this demo, if I had time to do that, is with their command line interface, you can just go Vapor deploy, and it's for free. You have like 20,000 requests or whatever. on their website. Like their website is vapor.codes for like the framework website. But if you go to vapor.cloud, they actually, I guess that's kind of like their business model in the long term, is that they provide a framework and they can also like do hosting as a service. So you can do that. That's like the cheapest, quickest option. Is like you want to try something like you're developing and you want actually like being running on probably Linux and not your machine, just to test that it works. And I haven't looked at other options for deployment because I didn't have time. But
that's a start.
I think you can also, like, they have scripts or like already prepared like images, Docker images for Heroku or something like this, but I've never tried that. And I know those words, but I've never tried that. So I don't even know how it works. Like, I can say Heroku, but I don't know what it is. Yeah, Kitura. And I think they are sharing a few components with Kitura, but I'm not too sure. But for example, coming back to the templating engine, Leaf is the one that's provided and is the first-party one, but you can also use Mustache, I think. And I think there's even a first-party kind of adapter, so you can just use Mustache and an adapter, so it goes into Vapor very quickly if you're more used to use Mustache as a templating engine, for example.
More questions, guys?
Thank you.
Want to take another one from Matt? We can. The party is spoken.
So, jumping on what Jesse just asked about, why would you choose Vapor over Kitura or Perfect or something else?
It's a very personal choice for me. I went with Vapor because I think when the first few web frameworks came out, before it was called Vapor, it was slightly different, and it was just like a side project of some random person on GitHub, and it looked like, I looked at their code and it looked pretty good. And Kitura, I don't know, I tried to reading their thing, but it seemed like there was more setup. And I wanted to actually do like a comparison of like, okay, I'm going to try like do a Hello World in Kitura, Hello World with Vapor, and Hello World with Perfect, because they are pretty much like the three main ones at the moment. Perfect, like you need to use a macOS app to run, and like it seems like they are trying to go the proprietary route. IBM, I don't know, it seems a bit heavier in terms of dependencies and amount of code. It's again like it's purely personal, like just first impression, looking at their GitHub repo, reading a few things. And Vapor seems like a bunch of people started something with fresh ideas and really rapidly came to 3.0. So I find that pretty promising. So that's why I wanted to give it a crack at this one.
Thank you, Jack. That was great. Cool.
Thanks, Jet. That was really interesting. I think the Swift on the server stuff. Let's see. I don't know. I'd be interested to see if someone do it. The CocoaHeads website's written in PHP. There may be. Someone send me a pull request converting it to Swift. I need a YAML parser and.
No, that already exists.
Okay. All right.
Means you can make it CocoaHeads. I always have shared code base with Vapor.
It's the same app.
Are you volunteering?
No.
Yeah, I think he just did.
You've got plenty of free time at the moment, right?
So, as we said at the start, our next events.
Is that on?
Yes, everything's on. Our next hack night is next Wednesday at AConnects. If you're interested in learning Swift on the server and you're inspired by Jet, I'm going to try and convince Jet to come along. Check out Vapor, have a fiddle, bring out along your questions.
That's also co-run with the Android DEG guys, so if you have any interest in learning Android, Kotlin, that sort of stuff, come along as well.
Yeah, so it's been really successful and really fun the last couple of months. It's an alcohol-free event, so it's open to everyone. There's no age limit. it's totally appropriate. And we don't have pizza. We have different food.
To be determined this month.
To be determined, but...
Last month we had Turkish, wasn't it?
We had Turkish last month. It was really good.
Sushi was the next on the list.
Was it? All right.
What was this event?
This is the hack night next Wednesday. Bring your laptop, bring your little hack projects along. If you know what you're doing, come along and be ready to help someone else. If you want to learn something, come along ready to ask some questions.
Always use more mentors.
Yes.
There is food, and it's free food.
And it's not pizza.
And it's not pizza. It's better than, yeah. Our next NS breakfast is May 4th at Higher Ground in the morning. And Matt has the NS Breakfast Twitter account. And I try and retweet that if I notice it, but that's on May 4th. Next drinks night is the 24th at the Millhouse From.
Anzac Day Eve too, so that's a good excuse to not have to go to work the next day.
Anzac Day Eve, or you can stay out late and turn up for the march first thing. And our next meetup,
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, it came up eventually. Our next meetup is back here on May 10th. It's 4 or 5 weeks from tonight.
It's the one before Dub Dub.
That's the one before Dub Dub. And our one in June is before Dub Dub as well, I think.
Is it? Is it? No, I thought it
Or
would
it's
have
up.
been Dub Dub week.
I didn't have to change it. I didn't have to move it around. It's suited one way or the other. So
Actually,
Might be after.
yes, because Friday the 1st, which means the second,
Okay.
the first, when Thursday is...
It's fine
It's Dub
now,
Dub.
it's 2 months.
Yeah, cool. All right, great. No, it's important. I screwed it up last year and we had to swap venues at the last minute. So that's the next meetup. Thanks for coming along. We've got, I think Oliver, you've put your hand up. Is he left?
He's running out the door.
He's put his hand up for a presentation next month. Great opportunity for everyone to ask questions. But also...
I put my hand up for next month as well.
Just to ask a question of Oliver, I assume?
But if,
Well, there's always that.
Yeah, we're taking calls for questions for Oliver. But if you're interested in doing a presentation, and it can just be something you're interested in, please let me know.